And now, so the first thing that I want to talk about is actually about design in general. It's kind of a design principle, and it's going to lead into the rest of what we talk about today in terms of designing virtual spaces. Now, there are like goals about virtual spaces that you want to hit, and I have a list that I've been compiling because I've made a few spaces now, and I've made a few spaces for clients, and I have an idea about what it is that they need. And I think the biggest one right now, I'm just gonna open with it, is this one right here, and I'm gonna share my Photoshop. It's that we create the opportunity for amazing virtual photography that documents awesome event experiences. So that is actually, I think, the forefront principle of a virtual space is actually the photography that can take place in the space. And if you think about it from that lens, your design your design intention is going to be different. You're going to be thinking about the compositions. This is the same thing where they have a very similar approach in game design in video games, where yes, the point of the video game is to overcome the obstacles and solve the puzzles and learn about the characters and all that stuff. Excuse me, there's a big tractor going by. I don't know if you guys can hear it. Um, but yeah, it is about to overcome those obstacles and learn about the characters and solve those puzzles and be immersed in the game. But along that way, the way that we really sell that story and experience is uh, through visual storytelling, which is ultimately all about the rectangle, right? So if I just it's 2D composition, and that is still going to be the forefront of what we do for a long time. It's about the rectangle, right? And how we see it. And 90% of the people that are in these virtual spaces, in these metaverse spaces, are still coming in on browser, on desktop browser. 7% of them are on mobile devices, and 3% of them are on VR headsets. So right now, everything that we do needs to be about the rectangle. It needs to be about that composition. Now, down the road, as those numbers start to shift more into mobile, well, not into mobile because mobile's still a rectangle, but more into VR headsets, then it's going to be more about the sphere, right? And it's not a full sphere. It's a uh, it's like a 270-degree sphere, whichever with a 55-ish field of view camera, right? Because that's what our human eye has the range to see. And so that means that we'll be composing images for about there and about there until I can no longer see my hands, right? It's going to be a conic view, but it ends up still being that same design compositional principles that we have in 2D, that the fine artists developed, that Pablo Picasso pushed forward, that Andy Warhol pushed forward, that Rembrandt and Caravaggio pushed forward. So that there's a million of them, and I could list them forever. But it's these design principles that we actually want to integrate into our spaces, so that way our spaces are akin to fine art, because fine art is really what is going to impact the highest degree of emotional resonance between our guests and between ourselves and our guests, between our work and our guests, and between the guests and themselves, right? Because if you're walking around the world and it feels like fine art, or it even better, you don't even know that it feels like fine art, but it has that emotional resonance with you, then it is going to be a successful virtual space. So that's basically, the overall, the hierarchy, like, just top down view of like what is the most important priority. Now, after that, we can get a little bit deeper into um, the user experience. And these are some of the tenets that I think are pretty useful. Um, you know, uh, this doesn't have to be for every case. I think the last one is like a real rule that you can apply to everything. But um, and actually, before I dive into these, I have some examples of that. I did an event where we had some. Let's see. I did an event where I did a test here, and I met this person, Brandon. He was going to rent out our space, and after our meeting, I sent him this little image of the selfie of the space that he's going to rent and said thank you. That I sent to his email inbox. That helps develop our brand relationship as a touch point. This was my first office that I made, which is, not nearly as nice as the newer one. But again, I'm thinking about the rim light on the characters coming from the window. I'm thinking about how this works compositionally. And I am trying to create as compelling virtual photography as possible, because it's the virtual photography that's going to go onto LinkedIn, onto Instagram, onto TikTok. Well, I guess TikTok would be videos, but even in Discord, it's the virtual photography that's going to bring people into our spaces. It's going to show them that, hey, there's a bunch of people here meeting in an art gallery. This may be something that I want to participate in next time. This is the type of, these are the types of photos that you want to have after an event, where people are able to remember and relive the experience and also share it with everybody and share it with their network. And then that's what grows these platforms. That's what attracts people. So we want to design these spaces with this virtual photography in mind, because that is going to lead to really powerful compositions, and it's going to lead to a higher engagement across the board. And this is something that I made, as a promo. None of this stuff is like amazing stuff, but as my lighting is getting better in this space, and as my models and my textures and my designs, as my designs get better, thinking about this 2D final output product, thinking about the results. It's like it's goal oriented design, result oriented design. If I am designing with these types of posts in mind, then all of a sudden the lens through which I view the world is completely different, and it's easier. It's an easier problem to solve, to tell compelling visual storytelling, than it is to try to nail down like 100 different spaces that you might be able to browse around in and experience. It's just like that is it's a more difficult challenge to try to design a universe. So we want to break it down into smaller bite-sized chunks. And that brings me to actually even higher level than that. That is to tell a story. That is to have visual storytelling, and to have composition, and to be able to strike an emotional resonance with your guests and with your audience, which is critical in all forms of art. But that's art. Design is different. Design and art are like conjoined twins, but they're separated at birth. They're really only still attached at the ankle, because they've almost completely dissected the two. In the beginning, it was a little bit more ambiguous, but now where we're at here is design and art are like sisters. And design is all about purpose, and it's all about, let's say, a means to an end. Now, it doesn't your virtual space, if you're creating a virtual space for a client, shouldn't just be a virtual space that's really cool looking. That's awesome. Love that. That fits kind of into the art category. Your virtual space should actually scratch a specific business itch for your clients. Right? So you have to determine, like, what is this space going to do for them? What is the result that you hope to achieve at the end of this project? And what is the measurable goal that we can achieve with that? So say if I'm commissioning, if I'm being commissioned by a Discord community server, and they want to build a virtual space, and this is something that's happened. And they want to take their Discord community server from 500 people to 2,000 people. That's a measurable goal. Now, I can see how a virtual space may solve that problem, right? And we may be able to offer them a virtual space that they can communicate in, and it's instanceable, and there's many different things. And so we need to dive into the Discord community. We need to find out who these people are. We need to find out their culture. We need to find out what brand and graphic and cultural icons and the visual language that they use and the actual language that they use, whether that be words and speaking the way they speak to each other, and also like the emojis that they use and the style of that. Is it an anime community, or is it is it a pirate ship community? Like there's a whole bunch of different cultural elements that we're going to need to sink our teeth into in order to create a space that is actually going to invite more, using the virtual photography as a result of this space that's going to invite more people that's in line with that community into the space. Now, to go from 500 to 2,000 is an increase of 4 times. So we actually need to find out where those 500 came from, and then we need to try to turn it into 2K by using the doubling down on effective price measures, or broadening our range of marketing tools, or avenues or platforms in order to show and invite people that fit with this culture into that Discord server. And we can absolutely use a virtual space to do that. But the virtual space is not just, hey, we want a virtual space because it's cool. The virtual space is actually solving a business problem. It's a measurable goal that we can try to achieve. And then using that, at a virtual space as a means to an end, um, as a design task that solves a problem in the client. Like the client has a pain point. I would like to have 1,500 more people in my Discord, and it's causing me pain that I don't have that, whether it be financial pain, or I'm not hitting the reach I want to hit, or I'm not being able to uh, market to the amount of people I want to market to, or sell the amount of courses, or whatever it is that their pain is. You find out that pain, and then you figure out if you have a solution to it, if you can solve that problem. And if you can solve that problem with a virtual space, then you continue forward with the process. And that way you can measure whether something's a success or not. Because if I take on this client and make this virtual space, and it goes from 500 to 1,000, it is semi-successful, but not as successful as we hoped it would be, not as successful as we planned it would be. And so we need to figure out why it didn't work as well. What parts were we wrong about? What parts didn't we think through well enough? Was it the virtual photography, which is probably going to be a big part of it? Was it the functionality of the space? Was it we weren't marketing in the right areas? Was it that there was a disconnect between the culture of the community and the branding of the virtual space and the design of the virtual space? Why didn't it work? But when this is a SMART goal, which is hey, Sean, can you hit me with that acronym again? It's simple, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. Right? Is that right?
Very close, yeah.
Pretty much, yes.
Ah, that's right. Okay, thank you. Yeah. I think the first one isn't simple, right?
Uh,
Specific. Sorry.
Specific.
one, yeah.
Yes.
I
Thank
have
you.
many unmutes to get to when I want to speak.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I won't bother you again. Yeah, okay. So if it's a specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound goal, then we can start designing the space with that in mind while approaching the while always keeping our virtual photography as our North Star, because that is what's going to bring people into the space and allow the space to grow and allow community to happen. It's a bit like, you throw in an amazing party, like, you throw, like, you hire the DJs, you have the artists, you got some performers, and you want to do this every month, but no one's allowed any cameras or no one's taking any pictures. It's real hard to get this party off the ground, right? Super duper hard. But if you have a much smaller party, but you hire a photographer and they take some amazing shots, the next party is going to be bigger, right? So it's just a part of the world that we live in, is that photography is going to be our biggest, and videography is going to be our biggest marketing points, whether you're doing a real life party or whether you're doing a virtual party. So keeping those 2D compositions in mind and those 2D storytelling elements in mind is going to be critical. Now, are there any questions about what I've talked about so far? Super happy to open the floor for any discussion on those points. If you disagree, or if you have an alternative idea, or if you think there's a more important priority that I'm skipping over, let me know. I'd love to talk about it.
Um, I thought it was neat that you highlighted the, it's cool that you could make a cool like visual space and architecture and like sick room and sweet shading and shadows, but the design language, let's take like Nike as the example, like the design language is ever more important to capture the audience. Yeah, I think that that would be a
Absolutely.
huge distinguisher. And you're saying like, if you're trying to change the metrics, if you're trying to make, a more enticing visual space, because really they want to make more money. So you gotta do
Yep.
something that's like different. But I think viewing it as like a design language and focusing on like what the brand is and what it means, and it's kind of like concept art to some degree, or like, yeah, that's the distinguishing factor. I think it's like super key.
Absolutely. Yep, yep, and that's where, that's the two sides of things. Design is for impact, right? When we design things, yeah, you're right, they wanna make more money. Sometimes they don't wanna make more money, sometimes they just want more awareness. Sometimes, but whatever it is, it's about impact, and very often it's about money, right? So if it was Nike as an example, then they would want to have a space that resonates with their followers, resonates with their values, their brand values, which is like, dedication, perseverance, hard work. These are the things that Nike kind of stands for, and how would
Right.
we integrate those into the space so
Like
that
just
way.
do it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it may be something that you have just do it on the tile in a roughness map, like in the reflections of the floor. So it's subtle, so it's sleek, but when you're hitting it at that right angle, it says just do it, and it's not yelling at you just do it. It's whispering it to you, and and that would be a perhaps a higher emotional impact for the customers and the brand followers of that brand. And then on the other side, there's the fine art side. Fine art isn't about measurable impact, right? Fine art is about the emotional impact. Fine art is when you're looking at a piece in a gallery, whether it be an underground group of college kids where it's like, 6 people and they're selling PBR over the counter for $8, just to try to pay for the space they rented, or whether you're at the Guggenheim or at the MoMA and you're looking at a piece, it doesn't really matter. This fine art is about the direct resonance with the emotions of the audience. So that you tell a story with a paintbrush or with a sculpture or with a virtual space that speaks to the individual that is viewing it and says, "Oh my God, I have felt what this artist was feeling when they made this piece." Right? It's a completely different side of things. But when we're talking about design of virtual spaces, we want to hit both, right? And we can. We totally can. And I think artists in general, creative people in general, always lean on the fine art side. And that's awesome. Like, that's the best, most fun thing that you're ever going to do and experience, like, at least for me, right? But on the design side of things, we actually need to build things that move the needle. Because if we want to do this as a living, if we want to make money doing this, then we have to make other people make money. So it's not just enough for you to get hired to make a cool space and then you go, okay, there's your space done, and then the client isn't able to do anything with it. You actually need to kind of get into the client's pain, solve that pain if you can. If you can't, you direct it to someone else. Like, hey, you've got an Instagram marketing problem. Like, that's not something I can solve, but I'll point you towards the people that can. But if it is something where like this, and there are a lot of pain points that are coming from lack of virtual spaces, they're coming. It's a huge field. Right now, I don't know any therapists that are using online WebXR or Web3D spaces. I'm sure there are some. I just don't know any yet, right? But once every therapist knows someone who knows someone, that's a colleague or that there's a friend of a friend in the business that has a virtual space that makes a killing doing it, because you might, as a therapist, you might be making $90,000 a year, right? You might be making 150 to 200 bucks an hour for each one of your clients. And it might cost you $20,000 to have a custom virtual space on your own private server, which is secure and is only accessible by your clients, right? And that eats out of your 70K pretty substantially. But if you spread that out across 12 months, then it's a little bit more than, it's a little bit less than 2K a month. And if you do 2K a month, then you're to build the space, in payments and to rent the space and to host the space, then all you need is an additional 10 clients in order to, that's 10 more hours of work. All you need is 10 more hours of work in order to pay for that space. And that space, instead of charging $200 a client, you might be the only therapist on the block with a virtual space where you can have therapy on the beach or in the woods or in a spaceship or whatever it is that you want, that you design with the culture of your brand, right? And all of a sudden you're able to charge $350, $450 per each client. You only need 5 clients now or less to pay for that space. And now all of a sudden you're making way more money than all the other therapists. And all the other therapists go, oh shit, we need to compete. And now every other therapist in the entire industry has a pain point problem. And they say, I need to solve this. Now, I'm just choosing random numbers, 20K for a space. I don't know how much, how much you could solve for, how big the problem is that you're solving for 20K or not. And I don't know how like how much they're getting paid an hour and how much they'd be able to charge more an hour for these virtual spaces and all that stuff. Like, there's a lot of math that I'm just wiggling around here and just making guesses at. But once online therapy starts going into these virtual spaces, you'll bet your ass that there's going to be a whole bunch of therapists and therapist networks and like the companies that are comprised of all the multiple therapists that are going to be shifting in that direction, and there's going to be problems that can be solved by creating a compelling virtual space or by renting a compelling virtual space. And just to add to this, this idea of renting virtual spaces, this whole stream, I think Charles just left, but this whole stream is sponsored by Utopia VR, and by Charles C, who's one of the founders of Utopia VR, and they are renting out virtual spaces. So it may be that you're able to create spaces for a company like Utopia VR, and they'll rent them out to those people for you, and they'll have that rental that rental pipeline and infrastructure in place. Because having run my own metaverse company for the past 12 months, I have a great amount of respect for companies like Charles that are able to actually run the tech infrastructure that it takes to rent out these spaces and rooms on a regular basis. But yeah, so that is kind of the both sides of it. It's the design side and the fine art side. And the design side is specifically about solving problems. It's about solving measurable problems with specific, measurable, attainable. No. Specific, measurable, attainable. I don't know if that's it. Realistic. Achievable. Thank you so much. Achievable, realistic, time-bound goals. So in 6 weeks, I will produce for you a space that looks like this, that is within my wheelhouse to be able to do, so that you can X. And that X will solve the pain that you're in, right? And that is something that is going to, over the next 12 months, that is going to really start kicking up. These pain points are really going to start being visible for a lot of different people. So I'm going to actually move on to the part 2 of this design principles conversation, where I'm actually talking about the process of me designing a space, like how I start, and assuming those things have been figured out, the goals have been set, the measurable, achievable goals have been set. I know what metrics I'm trying to solve, but I'm still an artist and I still want to make fine art that has a high level of emotional resonance. And I have a pipeline that I've developed that allows me to do that. Now, I'm going to talk about it in just a minute, but before I do, I want to see if there's any opportunity for discussion or conversation here that we can kind of engage on before I move on. Any questions or anything like that?
I think just fair to point out, you were discussing about therapists, looking for meta spaces. I think that if you look at just Canada, most people have to choose their trades not based on what they want to do, but what's available. So if you're living in a small town and you want to be a therapist and they already have enough therapists, then you can't really pursue that goal. But the meta kind of changes that dynamic, which means that your possible clientele is anybody with a phone, anybody with the opportunity to engage the internet. And so a lot of the conventional dynamics that we have for these sorts of works, anything that isn't obviously physical related, is being completely changed, which means that a part of Canada that has incredibly high demand looking for therapists can now solve that urge by putting funding into other parts of Canada where there's a lot of people looking for work, a lot of people developing in that field. So anyway, just from a business person standpoint, I think that the real benefits of the meta, are still sort of just barely being touched on, and the advantages, I guess, for everybody across the world, is much higher than we predict.
Couldn't agree more. Yep. Yeah, we are all underestimating it. Like, I think it's going to be absolutely huge, and I know I'm underestimating it. And to speak to your point a little bit more about that, yeah, this globalization, and even I'll say the democratization of work, because it turns more into a meritocracy when you can hire anyone on earth to solve a problem, or that when you can serve or sell to anyone on earth, right? So just like you were saying, a small town therapist may only have a certain range, but when that therapist is able to serve anyone in the world, then there's a lot of opportunity. Uh, and vice versa, you can get therapists from anywhere in the world. But yeah, another thing to point out is that even physical businesses will eventually benefit, not just benefit, but need something like this to keep up. Because if you're a masseuse, you're not going to need this in the short term. But masseuses also didn't need websites for a long time, right? They were in the phone book. Yeah, you didn't need, you had flyers at the rec center, right? You didn't need a website, but at some point you do, right? And then at some point they needed a Facebook page, right? And now we're going to get to the point where, as Web3 starts to take over, I don't think this is going to be inside of the next 12 months, but probably inside of the next 24 to 48 months, you're going to go to a masseuse's website and it's going to be an architectural render of their massage table where you can look around at their space and judge the space and judge the culture, judge the brand before you make an appointment there. Right now we do it with photography, but and that scratches the itch. And just like there are still businesses that I don't know if there are any businesses anymore that don't have websites, but eventually we'll get to the point where Web3 takes over everything. And I don't want the photography. I want to actually go to the website, janedoemasseuse.com, and I want to look around the space. And then there's Jane Doe's avatar, and Jane says, "Hey, would you like to make an appointment?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." These websites are going to be portals directly to the people that are in the business, right? And that is also speaks to the point that I was making last week about why it's so important for these to be open source and decentralized institutions, that decentralized organizations, that you're able to create your own virtual space, your own private cloud, your own private metaverse, and have this as the World Wide Web was set up in the 90s, right? That everyone could have their own website and there was no gatekeepers on who could spin one up, and how many people would be able to access and reach that website. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to get educated about building these spaces, hosting these servers, and having this stuff up. Because right now, Facebook's Meta is, is coming down at such a barreling speed that it will get to the point where by the time it gets to the masseuse, there will be no open source alternatives for that masseuse to have their own Web3 website and their own little metaverse space. They'll probably all just do it on Meta. And that's a little bit gross and it's a little bit dangerous, right? Because when you have one single entity that has complete control over all the connections between people, it gives them a disproportionate amount of power to influence how those connections are made and where they're made. And just the track record of that company has not ever prioritized public service or health or safety. It's always prioritized maximizing the amount of time spent on the platform. And I think it doesn't take a lot of creativity to think about how that dystopian outcome could result of that. And I'm not here to just talk about the Facebook's evil, because I don't think they're evil by nature. I just think that their brand values are not in line with the public safety, and because they're such a public tool. I also think that they've done wonderful things. They really have connected a lot of people. It is really amazing and impressive what they've done. I just don't want them to be the only service. I want all of us to be able to spin up our own alternatives and run our own little websites or our own little metaverses that are our own spaces, that we have control over and that we have a complete autonomy over, instead of having to, file into one of the largest, most ethically neutral corporations and technology companies that humankind has ever known. So that is kind of my soapbox. That's my position. And I, if you guys want to talk further about it, I'm very happy to.
I just will say that in parallel to that, the gaming industry did something very similar where they just sort of opened up to Apple and Android. And because of that, a large portion of profits made by developers in both those applications, I think it's about a third, just shy of a third, is being consumed just by having them on their mediums. And so the opportunity for them to be as creative, right, to create the fine art in their designs, is actually lost on account of that. So I think that, looking at the evolution of new medium, that's just what I'm seeing. I'm seeing, the opportunity to avoid that parallel structure from recreating itself in the metaverse is worth mentioning. So I just wanted to say that I think that's good to point out.
Totally. Thank you. Thanks so much. Okay, so typically, and this is last week and this week, but I'm doing these every Thursday morning. Typically, I'll talk the first half about kind of the overarching high level thinking, and principles that are guiding my thoughts and process. And then the second half, we get into the actual nuts and bolts of how building a space or designing a space or the modeling, the texturing, or any of that stuff. As we continue, I'm going to be talking about modeling, texturing, shading, lighting, light baking, and publishing, and then server hosting probably, and then maybe even at the end of that, kind of the business side and the for the entrepreneurial minded, and kind of how you can work on improving or starting your own metaverse design agency, and how you can get clients and all that stuff. That's a few weeks away, but for now, I'm ready to dive into the nuts and bolts of how to design a space. But I'm ready to take questions on any of the things that we've talked about so far. If you're feeling like this isn't really what I showed up for, I'm kind of more interested in what. I'd love to hear it. So that way you can guide. I work well by interfacing with people and by responding to those questions. So I want to know what you're here for. I want to know if we've covered it or if we're about to, or I want to know if there's anything that you guys want to talk about or anything you're curious about so far. I know I just met a couple of you today, but everyone else I've known for a little bit longer. But if there's something that you guys want my thoughts or opinions on, or just want to share your thoughts and your opinions on, please, it's so open to you.
If I may, I think it seems that a lot of the work that you do is more art sided, which I find really interesting. I'd like to actually explore the conceptually the artistic side of, okay, how do you create the emotive response um and that sort of thing. I've always been a designer, and my difference between those two is an artist will take what you have inside and bring it out, and then a designer will take what someone tells you from out and then put it in, basically. So say, for example, my entire life has been clients coming up to me and say, okay, this is the experience I want people to feel, and then I will make that experience in the best way I can, for example. So I find that it's an interesting space. I find that a lot of the like NFT online metaverse sort of stuff does tend to lean a little bit more towards the artistic, which is quite interesting. So I'm coming into this from a game developer's perspective, where like quality is king, and it has to look good, and like has to make sense, and has to be optimized, and it's a very structured creative process. But I found that a lot of the metaverse does seem to be leaning towards just creating interesting things or creating interesting experiences, which is kind of doing my head in because I'm just not used to it. So I'm finding that a really interesting space and learning a lot about what do people want in this space? What do people want their experience to be, and what are they expecting with it? And I'm actually finding it quite difficult to adjust to that, because I always come from a controlled environment emotional response. So that's been an interesting learning curve for me. So coming from what sounds like a more artistic perspective, like this is how we create these experiences, and the results is really quite interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, you nailed it. You're totally right. I am definitely coming from the artistic side. I learned and explored design as a byproduct of needing my art to be higher functionality.
Right.
Um, and yeah, and you're right. Again, the NFT space and the metaverse space has definitely gone very creative, artistic, abstract, and it is a different approach. But I think that has happened in every new medium that does that super wild, crazy artistic thing has to get structured onto the design principles that you're probably more familiar with. This design is uh it has a root of engineering in it. You know, engineering is design, is like practical design, right?
Yep. Yep.
And and that's what a lot of what you're probably dealing with on a daily basis as a designer is dealing with the mechanics of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And in art, in fine art, there are these mechanics as well. They're just slightly different. You know, there's the 7 principles and elements of art, which I'm not going to rattle off because I don't know them all. But the principles are stuff like balance, unity, rhythm. Um, yeah. So like I said, I wasn't going to rattle them off, and I started. Um, but it's these principles that are useful in fine art for storytelling. So storytelling is how, to answer your question directly, storytelling is how we create the emotion. Right? When I say there was a seagull, it was flying along, and then it fell from the sky and splatted on the ground. That story can be tragic or comedic or neutral or dramatic or anything. And the way we tell that story visually is the emotion that responds to it. It's not actually the content of the data, right? The seagull, those are the facts. The seagull was flying along, it fell, and it splatted on the ground, right? Even using the word splat, it's got a little bit of flavor to it, right? It tones the story, right? And so, you know, if you were to paint this as a painting, the vignetting, the colors, the tonality, the perspective of the camera, the focal points and how the eye traffic moves through the piece is going to tell the story, right? And that is going to guide your audience through the story, and along the way they're going to relate to it or not relate to it if it's not successful. But if they relate to it, then that's going to trigger and respond the emotions in the human, right? So we have mirror neurons. This is the thing that when you watch somebody on YouTube when they're on a skateboard, and I think Sean could probably speak a little bit better about this than I can, but I'm not going to stay in here for too long. When you're watching someone on YouTube on a skateboard, and the skateboard, they're on a rail, and the skateboard flies out from underneath them, and the rail hits them right in the spot, and you go, ah, you're watching a YouTube video and you go, ah, right? Because you know what it would feel like. Your mirror neurons trigger, and your body doesn't actually know it's not happening to you. Right? And so that's the mechanism that we used to trigger emotional resonance with our audience. So as an example, my office is one of my virtual spaces, and I'll just I have this opening shot here. It's not actually an opening shot, but when you enter into my office, I'm going to share my Discord. Oh, let me not share my Discord. Let me open it up and share my Firefox. So when you enter the room, you see a logo at the end of the hallway, and when you turn to the left, this is your view. Right? You see this plants in the corner, you see the light coming in, you have this this shiny table, and I'm going to replace those chairs. I can't stand looking at them now. They need to be cooler. But you get this, like when you come in, you get this moment of appreciation. It's a well-lit room, right? It's the carpet is blue, the walls are orange, we have nice color temperature balance, we have a green at the end of the composition, right? And green on the wall, which is not probably perfect because it's not really in balance compared to the white on the wall on the left, would probably need some other hue for that whiteboard on the left in order for it to really fit even better. But this composition here is something that I have created gasps with. Right? So when people, they walk down the hall and they turn around and they go, oh, wow, this is so cool. And that gasp is because they feel like they're in the space. The light is coming in and they feel it. The body doesn't know that they're not there. Right? And so they almost feel the sunlight hit them. And then that triggers that emotional resonance. Now, when you're talking about stuff like the abstract NFTs and stuff like that with, memes and stuff, this is a really big conversation about what works and what doesn't. And in general, you're always following the culture or you're innovating and leading it. And if you're leading it, then you're changing it. It's not something that has been established by the culture. It's something that is actually new and going to likely be rejected by the majority of the culture. But there's a niche group that it's going to resonate with so strongly because their mirror neurons relate to it so powerfully that the value of feeling those mirror neurons activate when they look at that piece or when they show off to their friends that they own that piece or whatever it is incredibly motivating, and they feel it has an incredible value to them. And when it has a value to them, it has a value to everyone else that values that person's opinion. And this is how things grow. So it's like the first time you hear a song on the radio, most of the time you have a little bit of a distaste for it. But after you've heard it 3-4 times and you realize they're playing this on the radio every day, all of a sudden it starts to catch you start to fall into it or whatever. And it's because the culture drivers at the top of and radio stations aren't even a thing anymore, really. But like the culture drivers that pioneer this method forward are have established that this has an incredible amount of resonance with them, and they're going to continue pushing it until your emotional landscape lines up with that, because you start to, it only takes one person that you're a fan of, if you got a crush on someone and they go, "Oh my god, I love this song," then you're like, "Oh my god, I love it too." Because you value their opinion, right? And so you're willing to change your emotional landscape to resonate with it. It happens constantly, but this is how the art side, the fine art side, pioneers this stuff, and design is absolutely operating hand in hand when you're talking about new technologies. Like Pong was a design thing, right? But Pac-Man was an art thing. And that's kind of that I think that's the best analogy that I can use to describe kind of what this space is going to turn into over a long time. Is we want to turn into Pac-Man as soon as possible. We don't want to play Pong forever because Pac-Man beats Pong, right? As soon as Pac-Man comes out, no one's playing Pong anymore. And Pong is just a demonstration of the design capabilities, of the technological capabilities, and Pac-Man is how those capabilities can be turned into art. Does that answer your question, my man? Or you didn't really have a direct question. I think you did, but let me know if that's
Not really. It was more a discussion point in regards to design versus art and the somewhat shift towards, and maybe it always was, as he said, like there's any new technology or new section of a community will sort of be taken by the experimental, abstract, artistic approach, and then the capitalists will come and make it clean,
right.
basically.
That's
So
right.
I was like, okay, how can we utilize this and make money from it? Which for pros and cons and all that sort of stuff, but it's just an interesting process with that.
Mhm.
I think the only other thought had is with Facebook. I agree that previously their business models have been horrifying, but from the very little I've picked up on their latest Connect things with AR, because I think they understand that this is a much more serious game. Like they can't mess this up.
Mhm.
So they have noted a couple of things where they do have a panel or people involved with the what's the word? Nice, not niceness, nicety, yeah.
I get it.
Moral,
The ethics. Yeah.
morals, I guess. Ethics, that's the one, the ethical side of it. But on the flip side, if it wasn't for Facebook, we wouldn't be so far ahead with VR. Like
That's
the
right.
Quest 2 has moved everything because it's so cheap, and it's so cheap because they're farming our data.
That's
So
right.
pros
Yep.
and cons for sure.
Absolutely. And fingers crossed, that they do the right thing. My thing
Yeah,
is not actually directly against the individual company. I just want it to be as democratized as possible.
yeah,
I
for
want it
sure.
to be as open and to have as many competitors and alternatives as possible. I don't think consolidating it all into one entity or one corporation is ever a good plan for anybody, no matter how good the corporation is. Like,
Yeah,
even if they were like the best one ever, I still would be trying to decentralize it as much as possible, just because humans are humans. But you're
yeah,
100% right, and it's absolutely worth mentioning that a big part of the reason why this is kicking off so much right now is because of those announcements and because of those hardware decisions and investments that they've been making and developing as they pioneer the technology to make it at a cheaper consumer level, a cheaper point for more consumers to be able to make that shift. And yeah, they are the biggest player, making it more accessible to everybody as possible. So yes, there's goods and bads to it. Definitely pros and cons. I I, I just don't. I want to have as many mom and pop metaverse companies as possible.
yeah.
So on that note, I'm going to pop over into my production pipeline here, which is right here. And let me just start at the very beginning. So this is actually yeah, well, I'll turn this. This is basically the pipeline that I use for virtual architecture, right? And this is a limited scope. It's just virtual architecture. That's for semi-realistic spaces like that office. If you're going for more surreal, abstract, mushroom lands and all kinds of stuff, then some of these principles will apply and some of them will not. But just an overview of the way I approach problems is we start with the design. right? And in the design, the task of the designer, the task of this pipeline element, this department, is to find reference for the points of interactivity, the reference for the models, for the materials, for the textures, for the lighting, for the world space, right? And all of this should be, again, considering, and this is something I probably need to update on this document. We absolutely need to keep that 2D rectangle in mind. It always needs to be about the rectangle. So we are making sure that our designs stay compelling from a 2D standpoint. After that, we go into modeling. And where are my little arrows there? There we go. After that, we go into modeling. And this is a little bit of a deviation from the traditional animation and film pipeline. But after that, we go from modeling and into material development, right? So modeling, we have a 50,000 triangle max right now on Mozilla Hubs. In general, there are spaces that are way bigger than that. They just take longer to load. This does affect load time only. It doesn't affect streaming or interactivity once it's been loaded, but load time is affected by your polygon capacity. Okay, I am sharing my screen, right? Yes. Okay, cool. And I do the unwrapping in this modeling phase. Also, while I'm doing that, like in parallel, this would either be a second artist or this would be something I do, alternating between these two tasks, is the material development, which is creating or most of the time downloading any of the tileable materials that are not already built and adding them to the material library for the scene that I'll be using, right? And I have one massive material library with every material that I've built for any of these spaces that I can just drag and drop and apply. So after that, it goes into texturing. Now, texturing and material development are normally flipped in the 3D animation and film industry. Normally, you have modeling goes into unwrapping and texturing goes into look development, right? But this one, because with Mozilla Hubs and specifically, and I'm sure that this is going to be an infrastructure across, it's going to be like an interoperable metaverse standard, which there are those interoperable standards being developed and created now for the open source metaverse clients that are, the alternatives that we've been speaking about this whole time. It's going to make this a little bit cleaner. There we go. Is that we can have tileable materials with baked light maps, right? So you might have a 256 or 512 tileable carpet texture like my office, right? And then on top of that, a 2K light map. That will give you all the resolution you need from a color standpoint, color, roughness, metalness, all that stuff. It will give you all the resolution you need within a very small map. But the tiling shouldn't look so obvious and just repeated and bad if you have really compelling lighting that's shining on that's giving that variation. And like super pro tip, you can even add displacement into that tileable material that breaks up the tile, that bakes in shadows from the light map. So the light map will give you the opportunity for variation, and the tileable will give you the opportunity for really high resolution, because you can have a single 512 map or even a 256 map tiled 100 times, and if you get real close to it, you can still see all of the little fibers of the carpet. It's high enough resolution, but it doesn't look really weird over a long hallway because the light is changing on it the whole way down, and you can use that light map for that baked variance. So what I do is I set aside a different structure. I actually go through my materials, which are up here. I'm just going to drag this down. I go through all these different materials, and I kind of determine like which materials I'm going to need for the space. And these are my tileable materials, and there's so many of them that are available on, Polyhaven, which used to be HDRI Haven, and CG Textures, and now the Substance 3D Assets library from Adobe has some. And of course, you can use Substance Designer and you can make your own, which is awesome. But like these materials, they're getting made all the time and they're getting put out for they're becoming commodities, right? They're becoming extremely affordable, sometimes free, and you can bang out a whole bunch of materials all over your scene that are tileable that don't look terrible because you have convincing light baking on them, right? So my modeling and material phases kind of go in parallel. Because I'm going to decide which materials I find and which materials I download, so that way I can apply them to those models and do a tremendous amount of what would be the bulk of the surfacing, but all with like extremely affordable assets, like extremely affordable materials. Then after that, there's texturing. Now, some elements you will not be able to just have a tileable material for, right? So as an example, this is a super shiny table, so that's a problem. But this table has like a wood grain on it. It's actually photogrammetry scan of a real wooden table, right? And it's got the real wood grain on it. This is not a tileable material. The resolution that I get there is the resolution that I get. And so some materials are going to have that aspect, right? I want the least amount of them as possible, but also they do give a lot of character and life and uniqueness and variance to the 3D scene. So texturing is an irreplaceable part of this pipeline. I just am trying to limit the amount that I texture, and I'm trying to maximize the amount that I material develop or have these tileable materials. But having both of these is what's going to make your spaces feel very alive, but also optimized to the level that you can you'll be able to support mobile access hardware even from third world countries, because the tileable material is only 128 by 128 pixels, and you got a 1024 light map on it, and then you've got one maybe 512 by 512 textured plant. And there's another strategy to texturing these in extremely efficient ways called Atlas texturing. And Atlas texturing is something I'm going to talk about, I think, next week, or I'm going to do a tutorial on it this weekend. My schedule is pretty crammed right now, so I'm trying to do everything at once. But it should be stated again that all of these streams and those tutorials on the Atlas texturing thing have all been sponsored by Utopia VR, which is a company. You go utopiavr.com. They're renting out these spaces, and yeah, and they are investing in me to teach people about these spaces, because it's part of their long-term goals to have as many artists building unique spaces as possible, and they want to be able to train their community to do that as well. So they're awesome, and you know, it bears mentioning, it bears repeating how awesome they are, because they're allowing me to do stuff like this. So Atlas texturing is actually the way that this plant back here was textured, right? And it's super efficient, because you can have a 50, or let's say a 48 by 48 pixel texture, or even a 24 by 24 pixel texture with all these different colors on it, which basically look, you know, something like this color palette, and you can slide the UVs on any part of that texture in order to get these gradients. So this leaf has been unwrapped and stretched across a light, medium, and dark green, and that has allowed it to have that gradient that goes across it. And the texture sheet that is running that plant and this logo and the logo in the wall and the color of the table legs and chair legs and the color of the branding, the actual fonts that says MetaHood Virtual Spaces, is all running off of one like 64 by 64 texture with just a whole bunch of different colors on it, that's unwrapped in a way that will allow those colors to spread and gradate across it, again, for extremely efficient optimization. Like it's really easy to do that technically, and it's very optimized. So that is one of the things that I will be doing a deeper dive on either next stream or like I said, a tutorial this weekend. After that, we go into lighting, right? And this does kind of respond to the Matt Empire's talking point about how we're striking that emotional resonance in our audience. Is lighting is mood. lighting is storytelling. Like there isn't a difference between lighting and storytelling. Lighting is storytelling. So when I have a bright light coming through a window, I'm telling the story of what my environment is like. And you can imagine the same character underlit with like a dark, deep red, fiery look, oranges and yellows that's lit from underneath, will look quite hellish and demonic and evil, and will tell the story of evil power, right? And then that same model with different lights, with a nice warm, cool colors. It's still warm, still yellows and oranges, right? But it's like a warmer, maybe even pinkish and less red, top down with like a blue fill light coming from the sky. And it's just a soft lighting all the way around. The exact same character has a completely different story to tell, right? And so lighting is going to be, I think, one of the biggest and most underutilized elements of storytelling in the virtual space. Everyone's thinking right now about cool models like I want to walk through a mushroom kingdom, or I want to be on a pirate ship or whatever. But if you're on a pirate ship, like, what's the lighting? Is it a beautiful day in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, where you got all this beautiful blue skies and yo ho, it's an awesome life? Or is this like a dark evil pirate ship where these are killers and murderers, and they commit crimes and they pillage and they do terrible things? Like the difference between those two stories is actually just in how you light the scene, right? And storytelling is also implemented in texturing. It's also implemented in modeling, of course, right? But you have the most amount of emotional impact for the least amount of effort in the lighting phase. The difference between pink lighting and blue lighting is everything. Um, and like that's why if you check out Joker, you guys saw the latest Joker, right? The difference between Joker and the reason why Joker actually resonates emotionally with an audience so clearly in that way, that puts that taste in the back of your throat when you're watching this movie, about how this movie sits with you and how it emotionally disturbs or provokes you, or whatever your emotional reaction to the movie is. It's extremely similar to Taxi Driver, which is in the late 70s, right? And because if you look at the lighting and the color palette of Taxi Driver and Joker, it's the same. If I were to take Taxi Driver and Joker and have those references all over my screen while I'm modeling and lighting, let's say lighting my office, it's going to have a completely different emotional impact on the guests of that office. And what I wanted emotionally was for people to come in, feel very welcome, feel very clean, feel extremely professional, because this is a business office, right? But still lighthearted, and I wanted to trigger senses of beauty, of nature, respect to nature, right? So that's where I was at with this, building this space, and that's where I was able to achieve the certain amount of emotional resonance that I was, by having the view outside of the mountains and the forest, by having the plant, by having the wood table. These are all design elements that are pointing towards and leading my guests towards the emotional state that I want to put them in. I want people to feel comfortable and happy, and the ability for them to be vulnerable in the space and be honest with me in the space, and have these discussions in an honest and vulnerable way, and me facilitating those emotions with models, textures, and lights is basically the job of the virtual space designer, right? That's what that job is. Any questions about that?
I think it's fair to say you just hit on probably the most important thing in any sort of storytelling, whether anything that requires suspension of disbelief. And I think Meta, of course, is leaning into games in the same way. We're not trying to create like completely realistic worlds, it's just not in the capacity. But if we're trying to sell suspension of disbelief, I think you're absolutely correct. feelings of empathy and connection with the environment is going to be the way to do it. So I just think that's awesome.
No doubt, no doubt. Thanks for adding that. Cool. Is that any other unspoken thoughts around, like something that maybe you resonated with or you disagreed with, or something that may have provoked some type of idea in your mind, but you're a little bit hesitant to share it? I just want to open the floor for those types of thoughts. Anyone that hasn't shared anything yet that would like to, please hop in.
I'm curious if could you so you can't animate lights, right? Like so let's say like or when you reload this, like how would you be able to change the lighting? Would you have different seed values when you reload the website, or would the goal be to have like procedural, if it's like a real-time engine, would the goal be to have procedural shaders to control and not just have these textured, baked map situations? Like, is that where it's heading?
It's just such a great question. I mean, it is headed in all of the directions that you mentioned. I think all of the things that, whether it be seed values, procedural shaders, or animated lights, I think they're all going to happen. I don't know when they're going to happen, but I have seen already people are baking light maps like the way I have, and then running them through a linear, like a lerp node, which just like a color correct node that changes the exposure. Um, and they can turn down the lights, they can dim the lights by changing the exposure of the light map in real time, triggering that in the space. So you can actually have a light dimmer in the space to turn up or down the lights. Won't change the light, it will just turn it up or down. But you could see how this could also be used with a hue that, and you could change the color of the lights. You could, as it got brighter, it got less saturated, and then and cooler colored, and then as it got darker, it got warmer colored and more saturated, and you could simulate a daylight to sunset. Um, yeah, you could simulate these types of atmospheric changes. Dynamic lights work though. Dynamic lights, you can have real-time lights like a flashlight that's shining in the space. And there are animated GLB flashlights that you can just drop into a Mozilla Hubs environment and shine a flashlight into my office, and it will work. It's really cool stuff. The more dynamic lights that you have, the more intense it is on the processor. And mobile access hardware like cell phones and even VR headsets currently by default won't be able to, they by default don't calculate dynamic lights. They only will be able to see the baked in lighting textures. They also won't be able to see real-time reflections. So this is something that every year that goes by, the access hardware for everyone raises a little bit. All of our phones become a little bit better, depending on when you refresh your hardware. But every year that goes by, there's more and more people that have better and better access hardware, and so these more dynamic lighting is definitely going to be more prolific. And you can see, if you're interested at all in how the future of the metaverse space will go, all you have to do is look at how Unreal Engine started and the path it took, right? Because in the beginning, Unreal Engine had baked everything. They baked lights for everything, right? And they still use baked lighting, but you can see in Unreal Engine 5, is baked lighting is a little bit last year, right? And dynamic lights are way more powerful, and even extremely high poly counts are way more powerful, right? And all Unreal Engine has to do to solve the problem is streaming through the browser. If they can calculate all their stuff locally and stream through the browser, then they will kick up their metaverse, inside of the next 18 months, probably. I don't know. Who knows? Right? But they have a much smaller problem to solve. And at the same time, we went from 2001 style video game graphics to 2015 style game graphics inside of Mozilla Hubs and inside of this, metaverse clients and inside of Web3, let's say, and JavaScript 3.js, which is what it's built on. We went from 2001 to 2015 in like 5 months, right? So a lot of this stuff that has been figured out by like Oren Nair, who made the roughness shader, by Pixar and by Chaos Group and Solid Angle that make RenderMan and Arnold and V-Ray. A lot of this rendering stuff has been figured out and calculated, like a roughness shader, like a metalness shader, like all these PBR stuff, and how color bleed should work and how real-time reflections can work. A lot of them have been figured out, and now they're just integrating it. So it's not like we have to start at Toy Story 1 in the metaverse. We're actually starting with PBR materials, with realistic specularity, with Ornair roughness shader models, with like, roughness was something that came to be during my career inside of 3D animation. It had been around for a while, but in the last 10 years, because I've been in the animation industry for a little over 10 years, we went from specular glossiness shader models to Ornair roughness shader models. And in the metaverse, we skipped specular glossiness. We don't need it. We went straight to the roughness because we know that looks better, right? So a lot of this stuff is just going to come through. And to answer your question about the dynamic lighting and stuff, dynamic lighting, like all of that stuff is absolutely possible. We know how it can be done, and even we can approach solving those problems now with dynamic lights that change. But for enable to do it in Mozilla Hubs or this open source client, you kind of need to know your way around how to update and modify the 3JS branch. In which case you may want to talk to some of the developers at Mozilla Hubs. If you don't know how to do that, you may want to talk to the developers at Mozilla Hubs and say, this is the type of thing that we're interested in doing. Or in companies like Utopia VR that has their own private branch of the Mozilla Hubs cloud that they're developing and adding in other features and that is features and attributes that are separated from the Mozilla Hubs. It's forked from the original Mozilla Hubs code, and that these other companies that are running on Hubs clouds, which is like MetaHood, like Utopia VR, that will be able to make those types of changes and add those types of things in when it may not be in the Mozilla Hubs roadmap. They may not be super interested in that, but having your own private Hubs cloud, you can do that yourself, or you can rent out a space from a company that is a Hubs cloud that has those attributes. Because I know there are Hubs cloud attributes now that have dimmer switches, and that's so freaking cool. Like, dimmer switches are like the coolest thing ever. So I don't think it would be much to add in that HuSat dimmer switch and then change that stuff on an hourly basis. So over the course of an hour and a half, it's actually changing the lighting in the scene, and the lights in the room get brighter and the lights on the outside get darker and stuff. And then you could, if you visit your lawyer's virtual office and you're visiting them at 8 p.m., it may actually even, and this is stuff that's been talked about in the Mozilla Hubs Discord, it may actually find out what your local time is from your access and then set the colors of the lighting in respect to where you are. So if I show up at 8 p.m., it's nighttime in the law office. And if I show up at 9 a.m., it's daytime in the law office. And that's one more aspect of that livable, breathable spaces that we're trying to achieve. We don't want just these static ghost towns. We want them to feel like they're real worlds that are alive and can facilitate life inside of them. So that's so cool you bring it up, because there's a lot of different ways to solve that problem, and I think all of them are going to be developed. Any other comments or side points or interesting things you guys thinking about? I'm going to wrap up this pipeline and just kind of show you I'm showing you the overview of all the steps, but then I'm going to show you a little bit about, what each one of those steps looks like, at least the first couple. And then we're going to wrap it for today. And then we'll see you next Thursday as well. And we're going to do a deep dive into the finish the design and then start talking about the modeling.
I have I guess a quick question. Assuming the metaverse, continues to move forward, which inevitably will, I suppose, the biggest problem in game design is when you have contemporary games, it's really hard to advertise things that people would want. So if you're watching or playing a sports game, should be able to send like a fish and chips, right? So you should have fish and chips advertisements in the game that you'd be like, while you're playing in your period, you get to the intersection, you're like, you know what? I really like I really go for fish and chips. And they should be able to click on the ad. And so one of the discussions I've been having for a long period of time is implementing like the sort of ad-based elements that you see a lot of on the websites, into the metaverse. Is that something that you think that would be prominent, like maybe Starbucks commercials in the background or that sort of thing?
Yep, I totally think that that's going to happen, and I also, this leads to the conversation that we were having before about why it's so important to have so many different um, alternatives to a single metaverse company, and that anyone can spin up their own virtual metaverse, because it's definitely worth mentioning that we don't want to have all of that advertising capability and power consolidated to a single entity.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, this is one of the original things, when the pandemic hit last year, and I was running art markets at the time that had to be obviously closed. And I was virtualizing those art markets and those DJ streams, and running those online events through Zoom, through Twitch, and then started to develop having them on Mozilla Hubs. It was definitely something that I was super interested in, having a bar that you could walk up to the bar and order a drink from Uber Eats, and have that Uber app integration at the bar, so you could click on a drink from the bar in the metaverse and have that drink show up at your house.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that's coming, and we want to do it right, because I think there's a difference between being able to walk up to a bar and order a drink, and drink this can of Mountain Dew so you can continue playing, right? And there's both extremes of that, right? And it's definitely something that we want to be as conscientious about how our users are experiencing the metaverse, and serving them and not siphoning from them.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really interesting point, though, and it's super cool. It's definitely something that's going to happen.
Well, I just imagined a bunch of people like, working together in the metaverse, doing their daily stuff, and then about 10 o'clock saying, you know what, let's have a Chinese food lunch. And then they go to a virtual metaverse space. And because for me,
And order it, yeah.
I hate looking at my phone. I hate like sliding around and saying this looks good, but I can't see that. But going into a virtual space and like literally having it designed by somebody who's got the layout all worked out, so you can just like pan your head around and look at the menu and make up your mind and have an adventure, and that for me, that's the
Exactly.
big thing. But yeah, okay, that's
An
cool.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what Blockbuster used to provide. I miss Blockbuster. Just the going in, the atmosphere, just the idea that you're around people who love movies, and you'd be like, I like this movie, do you have anything like that, and just having
Yeah,
that
totally.
dialogue. But the environment, yeah. Anyway, thank you so much.
Hey, no worries. Yep, that's an interesting point about Blockbuster. They actually bet their business on that point. They thought, you know what? People really like to be in our stores, and that's what's gonna keep them loyal to us instead of the streaming services. And they bet their empire on it, and they lost that bet. So there weren't enough Sean McDonald's out there.
Well, I think as the dinosaurs go, as the markets evolve, I think that them being the very last dinosaur is a tribute to putting the
Hell
customer
yeah.
first in that way.
Hell yeah. Yep. All right. So, just to wrap this up, because we're basically done. These are basically the creative steps, and then after that, we've got light baking, which is it is optional. Like, you can use all dynamic lights, but boy, does light baking look nice. And it's also more optimized than dynamic lights, so it looks nicer, and it renders faster. Like, it streams faster to the devices. It's more optimized. So for me, it's a no-brainer. I feel like it's absolutely worth doing. And we are going to get to the point in the pipeline where I talk about how to make light baking a little bit easier and a little bit some add-ons and some processes that I do in order to make sure that it is as efficient as possible. But right now, as it stands, light baking is a very render intense process. It does take a very long time to do. To light bake the office that you saw, some of those light bakes were running for 30 hours. Or it's just crunching out the samples. And that is go ahead.
Sorry, what are you using for baking, if that's the case?
Cycles.
Right. Okay.
I'm using cycles, and I'm not denoising anything.
And what's your processor, Connor?
It's an i7.
Okay.
Yeah, and it could be better. But I was also light baking 4K maps with thousands of samples that would get to the point where I would not need any denoising because my sample count is so high that it's going to be a very smooth 32-bit gradient, right? 32-bit light map 4K file with thousands or tens of thousands of samples. It's going to take some time.
I'm finding that sorry, go for it.
Oh, please go ahead.
So I've been making in Unity, and I don't know much about Mozilla Hubs, so I don't know exactly the process, but so lately I've been baking a lot in Unity with Bakery, which is a very good asset that I highly recommend if you ever get into Unity baking. And I can usually get like 2 or 3 maps, so it's not nearly as high, in about 3 minutes.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's using the RTX as well. Like that's a designed RTX based baker. So it's kind of interesting how the results are pretty solid. And yeah, so that surprise is quite a long time in comparison, but yeah, you're probably pushing a lot more elements there, I guess.
Well, yeah, so I would be very curious to see what the results looks like, because we can absolutely get a few minute renders out of cycles, just 5-minute renders, 10-minute renders. Most of them shouldn't take longer than 20 minutes, but I actually I find that the difference between 97% quality and 98.5% quality is worth 100x the processing time.
Okay.
I'm trying to get to the very, very top of the quality bar, right?
Fair enough.
And I'm willing to take because I got a second computer. It sits in the corner,
Right,
and it
right.
just renders,
Yeah, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And there's a lot of denoising stuff in Blender, and yeah, I mean, Unity is doing path tracing, right? It's doing like actual ray tracing of the lights.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it should be nice. It should be nice. I come from a film and episodic TV background,
Right.
so I want it to be the best it can possibly be. Now I have optimized it. I haven't dealt with a 30-hour render in many months because it's not necessary. But I also have a plugin called the Lightmapper, the Nexella Lightmapper, which I should be doing a tutorial on soon. That can bake multiple objects at once. And so and which is what Unity does, but Blender doesn't do that by default. But I may be baking a 4K light map, a 4K floor map, a 2K table map, and then like a 1K plant map and a 1K chairs map, and then all of that with thousands of samples, and no denoising, and just sitting on a computer in my corner. And so if it takes 2 days, it takes 2 days.
Right.
But you know what? I'm completely alone on this island. Everyone else is like, just denoise, just to use this faster. It's faster. It's faster. I'm like, yeah, but I want it to be. I'm used to film.
I can relate to it. I just don't have the time or the patience.
I hear you. And I actually I think that's awesome. If there's a competitive edge that I have in the fidelity of my graphics, it's that I do have that patience. I'm willing to wait 60 hours for the best light map ever. So that way when people enter my space, they go, "Oh, how'd you do this?" I waited. I waited longer than everyone else.
Right.
But yeah, you know, honestly, you know, I am bordering on the edge of inefficiency. Well, let's be frank. I am way on this, way deep into inefficient land in this area. So more power to you. You know, use your denoisers, use the Unity one. You know, get your couple minute renders out, and if you can make it look gorgeous, more power to you. And I got to catch up to that.
Yeah, no worries.
Awesome. Sage, did you also have a question? Welcome, by the way.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. Got in here late. Sorry, I missed the beginning.
No worries.
You know, I just wanted to mention what light baking does for the user experience. It's like it really has an effect on the user experience, and so I think it's more than aesthetic. It has an emotional effect on you.
Absolutely. Yep. Could not agree more. Yeah, and that's you know, I'm not sure if you were here for it, depending on when you popped in, but yeah, there was a whole conversation on lighting and about how it's all storytelling. Lighting is pure storytelling, and it has I think a very underestimated value and how the user experience is affected by it. It's a critical part of making these spaces for me.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so it's worth it to go through that light baking. I wonder if light baking will be a thing of the past, though, if we get dynamic lighting and shadows in the future.
Well, they're nice. They're nice, and eventually they will. But you know, like I was saying, like Unreal Engine is now probably kind of walking away from light baking. It's not as necessary for its graphics anymore. It's still going to always be an integral part of the pipeline, I'm sure. But you know, as light baking, as the real time rendering gets better and better and better and better, light baking can the same result from light baking can probably happen in real time. And as we close the gap between that conventional path tracing system and that light baking uses and the real time lights like Unreal Engine offers, and like I'm sure Unity's not far behind, especially with their acquisition of Weta. You can tell that that's what they're doing. That's where they're going. I think you know JavaScript, 3JS, Mozilla Hubs, these types of rendering engines won't take nearly as long to get to where Unreal Engine is now. But I don't see light baking leaving the pipeline. You know, I would be very surprised if we weren't still light baking in 4 years. It's just so damn efficient.
I
And
think
it takes. Go ahead.
WebGL is the thing that's holding everything back at this point. If the like, there's a lot of stuff going on the web, right? So
That's where Mozilla Hubs is hosted. That's where you know that's where we're
right.
all the majority of us are at. That's where this pipeline is kind of built for WebGL. It's not a Unity or an Unreal thing. But that is what we're trying to get. We're trying to squeeze the WebGL fruit for every drop of juice we can get out of it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But you're right. WebGL is holding us back a little bit. But like I said before, it doesn't take nearly the time to catch up that it does to develop. So we have gone forward about 15 years in like a few months of JavaScript and WebGL updates, and so it is happening so fast. It's blowing my hair back, but it's super fun too. Okay. So the last little bit here, you know, just to speak a little bit more about, you know, what the Mad Empire was just saying is like this whole pipeline is for WebGL and 3JS, and there's basically only two steps left to it. This is the exporting the GLB with the model file, with all of the shaders, with the textures and the Mozilla Lightmap node, and you have that exported GLB for Spoke, and now you in Spoke, which is the in browser scene compiler, which is like Maya for the browser. You can create your assets and nav meshes. You can create your elements, which are real-time lighting, dynamic lighting, spawn points, waypoints, media frames, audio, media like graphics or 3D, any other additional models that you want to have in there, and particle emitters and dynamic water and all that stuff. And there is now, you know, I mean, it's always been there, but it's becoming more powerful. to actually skip the spoke phase and export the Blender GLB with all of these empties, with the hubs components attached to them straight into spoke, because that's where all the new stuff is, like environment maps, custom environment maps, and all that type of thing. So spoke may actually get cut off at the end of this pipeline, but that's the top-down view of it. This is what it looks like. And if you're interested in building these spaces, if this is the type of thing that you want to integrate, then let me just here's the promo thing that I made for us to promote this. But if I'm going to grab this layer and this layer and this layer, and I'm going to bring them over here. And if this is something that you want to get involved in, like, take a screenshot. Oops, that's a design thing. Just go ahead and take a screenshot of this pipeline and refer to this and ask me any questions that you want about any part of this, right? I had to slap on the branding in there because, I want it to be known that, these are the people that is bringing you this information. But yeah, if this is something that you're trying to work on, or that you want things to be a little bit more productive, then slap a screenshot and ask any questions that you have in this Discord or anywhere else you find me, right? But it's probably going to be in this Discord. I live here. And that's kind of the whole pipeline.
Is there any animation in Mozilla Hubs?
Yes, there is.
At what point do you do that? Do you do that in like Blender and all that, or you do that inside Mozilla?
You would do that inside of Blender, export out the GLB with the Blender animation, like their non-linear animation tracks and stuff. Like,
right.
To be honest, animation is something that I have always kept at arm's length. It's not my forte. I suck at it. I don't want to be good at it. So, but I have, animation is something that brings a lot of these spaces to life. And, I talk to a lot of metaverse companies, that basically the topic of having animated assets in these spaces is becoming more and more important to everybody. Because, like, for example, in my office, I want an eagle to fly by. Right. If we're also, looking at little wind and firefly sprites, or, whatever type of, anything that you can do to add it in. And those types of stuff, that type of stuff would be its own pipeline where it's designed, modeled, textured, material developed, animated, and then exported in its own standalone animated bit. So that way I could drag and drop wind into any scene that wanted wind, and it would just play, right?
Yeah,
so it would be modular.
Yeah, go with it with Mona, because I did the winning category for the sci-fi, so I had.
Hell yeah!
I managed to. Thanks. I managed to luck in, like, just I crammed in some koi in the ponds, and it just added so much to the space, right? Just like 2 days, full, like, hell for leather. I need koi animated swimming around the pond, and it made such a difference. But even just like making water ripple and like waterfalls flow, and just such subtle things will make a huge difference in a space and just make it feel alive rather than just very static. And that makes a huge difference. Even like, say, like that pot plant in your office, for example, having such a subtle movement of wind, for example, would be it's a strange thing. It's a peripheral thing. If you see it at the side of your vision, it's okay. But if it's not moving, something's off. Something's static and not moving. And it's just like, I don't feel comfortable in space. But as soon as you see those little fronds moving just a couple of pixels, it's like, okay, I'm okay now.
Yep. No doubt. That is absolutely going to be integral to all the spaces moving forward. I think the koi pond, koi fish in the pond is like just absolutely necessary. Like, that's what brings it to that higher level.
Every pond needs koi. That's the first rule of Metaverse. 100%.
That's right. No doubt. That is absolutely right. So you're good on you for pushing that envelope forward, because I might make an awesome sci-fi environment, but if I don't have, Sage, that looks great. Oh, that's awesome. You're amazing. Um, okay, yeah, sorry, I got distracted by Sage's amazing avatar. But yeah, no, if we had the exact same sci-fi environment and you had moving koi fish and I did not, it wouldn't be a close second. You
Right.
know, like it would be a huge, huge win for you. So yeah, and I think that's definitely going to happen over, you know, the next few months is when people start animating assets and bringing life to their scenes. The ones that don't have it are going to be left behind. It's the same as that other conversation where it's like, you know, once one coworker has a virtual space or once one competitor has a virtual space that and you don't, then you're starting to get left behind. So I think that's awesome. Good on you for pushing that needle forward, and also, you know, congratulations on your well-deserved win. It was probably your space that introduced me to Mona because I got hit with an Instagram ad, and I
Right.
saw the spaces on there, and I was like, damn, these are some really good spaces. Like it's the first spaces that I saw in the metaverse, like anywhere, whether it be Unity or Mozilla Hubs or anywhere, where I was like, okay, this is a community of top artists that I want to start to get to know.
Yeah, no, it's fun. I'm actually kind of working with Mona now, so it's been a very interesting month and a half.
Fantastic, good for you, man. Congratulations. All right. Okay, so the I'm gonna close this out. I got 15 minutes left, and I'm gonna close this out with showing kind of like, you know, this is my process, right? But what does that actually look like in the design phase? So it looks like, let me just where is this layer? Let's check, don't need that. I have, yeah, so this is kind of like if I was making a cabin in the woods, for example, these are the type of references that I might pull together for the lighting as really cool colored skies and really warm colored lights, right? It's warm colored lights on warm wood, right? And then this is not a lighting reference. This would just be a modeling and materials reference. I like the material of the fireplace. I like the design of the windows. I like the modeling on the floor. This might be a modeling and material reference where this might be actually the shape of the cabin in the woods, and this might be like, you know, the side I like that rainproof kind of material on the side there that feels really nice, especially with the roughness map, how it's changing over the space. I think that really catches the eye. It looks really nice. So this might be another modeling and materials reference, and this might be my world reference, which this is what it's going to look like outside. And I can pull from all these different design elements, these design references, and I can actually start to create, you know, the blueprints for, let's see, let me, there should be a black layer here. The blueprints for how I'm actually going to build this out. Now, these are blueprints that I didn't draw. I just found some things from Google Images, and you know, if you have a very specific space that you're trying to design or draw, then you're probably going to have to make something new, which I would encourage. You know, the gallery that I built, the Leonardo gallery, was based off of a sketch of a basilica from Leonardo da Vinci. So I did start with some seed of something. So there, and you're always going to probably end up doing that. But you can see that I've found enough blueprints here to push forward on this design and give kind of a walk, a pretty easy place to start with how I'm going to model this out. Now, if you have architectural experience, this is going to be easier for you. If you don't, then I would refrain from matching anything that you find online unless it specifically says that it's, you know, Creative Commons, because you don't want to get in trouble because you made a virtual version of some architect's work and then they sue you for all the money that you sold it to whatever client you sold it to. And so you definitely want to make sure that you have permission and the right to use whatever reference you're using if you're going to be matching it. So Creative Commons is awesome, or just using this as inspiration and creating your own new blueprint is awesome. Definitely a good strategy. And then, you know, we go again to this materials. See, I'm just move this up. There we go. this materials palette where I'm deciding this is what the snow should look like outside. This is what I want the leather chair in front of the fireplace to look like. This is going to be the couch. This is the iron chimney. I like this floor for the kitchen. You know, this would be a great interior wall material. And with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I have got this one for the outside, but I could probably even use this as a variant of this one. For 6 materials and probably 3 textures each, which are probably going to be about 256, maybe 512 for the couch, right? Maybe 512 for the wall, or the walls maybe even go up to 1024. But I'm able to get like 18 textures and get a tremendous amount of realism and a tremendous amount of visual quality. Because part of what makes these so nice is not actually just the high resolution textures or anything, but it's the design. It's the design of these colors, these warm colors that we're working together. You know, I'm imagining going back to my design reference, using this always perpetually as a guideline, looking at how these designs are going to fit together, like how the materials are going to sit under the warm colored lights, how the nice sky, the cool colored skylight is going to bounce and reflect off of the snow outside. And we can create a really emotionally resonant, homey, comfortable cabin in the woods that makes people feel like they don't want to step outside because it's cold and snowy, but they want to sit on the couch next to the fireplace and have a nice fireside chat for the podcast they're recording. Right. And then that podcast, going talking about our first conversation about design intention, that podcast may be the thing that they stream onto YouTube with their fireside chat that actually changes the amount of subscribers they have to their newsletter. Right. And it's actually a measurable goal. And so if you're trying to increase the amount of newsletter subscribers you have, maybe the solution is fireside podcast chats. And maybe to separate yourself from all the other fireside podcast chats, you actually have a real fireplace. And you're actually having these conversations where you can see their hands moving and stuff like that, even though they're in completely different locations. And then you maybe even be able to sell tickets to the live stream and set up some other chairs on some couches around so other people can sit and listen in and join in on the conversation, very much like we're doing here. But instead of me kind of talking to everyone and taking some questions, taking some comments, and talking to a bunch of icons and pictures, it would actually be people looking around and sitting on the couch next to a fireplace. We have that little fire moving. We have a little bit of crackle of the fireplace going, and then we stream that to YouTube, and people go, "Man, I want to be in that next podcast recording. I want to sit on that chair." And you say, "There's no problem. We'll totally happily sell you a ticket for that, but there's a lot of demand, and so there's X amount of price." Right. And so this one virtual space ends up solving a monetary problem for the client, solving a newsletter subscription for the client, and then increasing the amount of podcast views they have, increasing their podcast channel for the client. And so then with these three problems that this one virtual space is solving, then this is a lot of value for your client. It's a tremendous amount of value for your client. And the value that the client receives for this big amount of value that you're serving to them, then you can take a percentage of that, not in an actual, like, I'm not talking about equity or stake in their company, but you can say, well, look, how much is it worth to you to solve these 3 problems with a single virtual space? Plus, you got to set up the podcast and everything. You got to set up the guests. You got to do all that work, right? Or they do, right? But for the value that you're providing, you're going to take a percentage of what it's worth to them to have that all of those problems be solved. And that's one of the reasons why this metaverse thing is so big, and why metaverse companies and metaverse artists are going to inherently undercharge for this stuff. We're actually building worlds. The amount of problems that you can solve by providing your client a world is massive, right? It's a huge value add. You know, it's like it's bigger than Zoom. It's bigger than Discord. It's going to be bigger than Facebook, which is why Facebook turned into Meta, right? Because Meta is bigger than Facebook. So the value of these assets, the value of this work, the value of doing really nice, you know, award-winning designs in this space is very, very high, right? And so I don't want us as virtual space company owners or virtual space creators, I don't want us to undervalue that. I want us to set the bar high, because if we start competing on price, then it's going to turn into Fiverr. You know, if you want a logo, you go to Fiverr and everyone's, I'll do it for $3, I'll do it for $2, I'll do it for $1, and we're just going to compete ourselves all the way to zero. And I don't think that's the plan. I think we have to solve real, meaningful, measurable problems for our clients that produce for them real, tangible business results. And that way we can all profit and benefit and grow economically in this space. So we're not like pioneering on a ramen noodle diet, right? On a ramen, we're not delivering champagne on a beer budget. We are really actually changing the metrics of these people's goals. So that's something that it's worth bringing up, that if I were to make this cabin in the woods fireside chat podcast scene environment for a client, it would be tens of thousands of dollars to do that. Right?
Connor, can I ask a
Yep.
follow-up question on that? So
Please.
are you using mostly base color textures, or are you using normal maps for all of these as well?
I would be using as many materials as is necessary to have it be aesthetically appealing. After that, I'll be using Atlas color maps, which is something that we're probably going to talk about later. I don't know if you know. It's just like a color palette texture that you can slide the UVs around, and combining that with light bake maps in order to get the highest possible fidelity for the least amount of texture space.
Yeah, and then
And-
also
Mhm.
I'd heard from an architect. I saw it was some webinar I was watching, and they were talking about the ability to have their clients visualize their buildings, something they could never do before. They would have to build the building and then deliver it to the client. That would be the first time the client truly experienced the environment.
Mhm. Yeah, no, architectural visualization is going to completely change. Real estate is going to completely change.
Do you know about workflows for bringing in CAD files, from like drafting in CAD to work with?
I haven't, but if you can get an FBX, a GLB, or an OBJ, I mean, I'm sure even an OBJ is fine. Like, if it's a 3D file that's not proprietary, like you guys know about Matterport.
Yeah.
Matterport is going to be a huge player in the architectural visualization space. Matterport's awesome, but the problem is all of their stuff is proprietary.
Yeah, it's expensive too.
Yeah, it's expensive, it's monthly recurring, and you can't take out their models. Like, it's super proprietary, it's super locked down. So
Those digital
yeah.
twin dollhouses are amazing.
Oh, really? I haven't seen them.
I have friends in architecture who are working exclusively now in Unreal, just because of the, all the things that Connor mentioned about how the lighting works and everything else. Just, they want to be ready for Unreal 5 and all the opportunities that will avail them, because they'll be able to drag and drop assets, free assets, and they can create these sort of spaces. And arc firms are no doubt building like a lot of unique and up-to-date assets that are in tune with the visual, I don't know the word, but the visual beauty of up-to-date furniture and up-to-date household appliances and that sort of thing, just to sort of give that look, whether it be for architecture for housing or architecture for big business or law firms or that sort of thing. So if you're interested, I think just look at some of the things that Unreal's doing, and I think that might excite you a little bit more, because it's pretty much all in one. You wouldn't have to go too far to really enjoy the creative process.
You're muted, Connor.
Thank you so much, Federica. No, I was just agreeing with Sean. Yeah, and Unreal Engine is definitely going to eat everything. But I really like that Unity has acquired Weta, so that they now have a real point to stand on in terms of competition. And I really like that Mozilla Hubs has created this open source platform for 3JS, because as they continue to develop it, Mozilla Hubs is looking more and more like Unity inside of the browser. And like I said, it's just going so fast that, choosing between Unreal Engine or Unity or Mozilla Hubs or any Hubs Cloud or any other open source version of 3JS, is going to be the choice of the designer. the tools will allow you to do different things. Unreal Engine will allow you to do different things, and Unity will allow you to do different things in Mozilla Hubs. But the way you use the tool is going to be, I think, very similar in all of them, in all of these types of softwares moving forward. It's just different specialties for each one of these tools. My favorite, obviously I'm biased, my favorite is Mozilla Hubs, because I love that they have Hubs Cloud. And I think it's super, super powerful. And I can see a lot of Web3 being more WebGL and 3JS based moving forward. So that's where I'm putting all my chips. But obviously Unity's epic. Oh well, I shouldn't say that. Unreal Engine's epic, obviously, and obviously Unity is going to be a real player in the space as well. But I'm relatively agnostic. I don't mind how we create these spaces or what we do, but the accessibility that comes from being able to access all of these spaces inside of just a single domain, just a URL. Like, I'm going to send you a URL and you're going to appear in my office. That is just so powerful to me, and it's something I can't look away from. All right, well that's basically it. That's my whole pipeline, and that's the whole the whole process that I take when I'm designing one of these spaces. And I'm gonna get into, next week, gonna get into modeling, and texturing the next week after that, and then lighting and light baking the week after that, and then publishing the week after that. So Thursday mornings at 9 a.m. They're both of these streams have been 2 hours long. I was only gonna do 1 hour streams, but they've been 2 hour streams every time, because that feels like the right amount of time to invest in, to be able to break this stuff apart. I really appreciate all of you guys coming. I really appreciate you guys adding your 2 cents. I know I've mentioned them a few times now, but I really appreciate utopiavr.com for sponsoring these and allowing me, enabling me to have these conversations publicly. Because, as I've said many times, a rising tide raises all boats. And I think that all of us in here, whether we're 3D artists or instructors or 3D company owners, we have a lot of value that we can give the rest of the world. And I think it's super important that we are, a rising tide raises all boats, and we're all working together to achieve these 2 goals and solve these big problems. So thank you all so much. If there's any other questions, I'm around. But if not, we'll see you guys next week. I'm here Wednesdays and Thursdays.
I have one question.
Yep, go
Please,
for it.
go ahead.
Can you stick around after the meeting, Connor, so we can have a little chit chat?
Sure thing. Yep.
Dope. Thanks, dude.
No worries.
I'm just on that, like, talking about value. I'm still getting my head around NFTs and the money that seems to be throwing around. It's insane. And coming from, once again, a game, so I can buy Cyberpunk 2077 for $80,
Right.
or I can buy a reasonable space, but like a space, for 30,000. So I'm struggling to connect the value with the old system and the new system, I think. And where I think we're in teething problems at the moment, so we're still adjusting a lot in regards to that sort of thing. And I'm assuming that once we get away from the one of one spaces and that sort of thing, that'll change a lot. So one of 1,000 or just unlimited, so each space is worth $10 to a user, but you can have 1 million of them. Is an interesting space. So what are your thoughts in regards to the current situation and where you think the value, like, as you said, you're a proponent of, we can create a lot of value and that's worth a lot of money, but a lot of people don't have $10,000 for a space.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, that's a really great question, and it's a multi-part question, so I'm going to see if I can break it apart. The first question is, why are NFTs so expensive, and when will that go away, right?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, and the second question is, we have so much value to give, but it's so expensive that it's going to be exclusive to money bag holders, right?
Yes, basically, yeah.
Okay. So the first thing I think, yeah, NFTs are nuts. But the reason why NFTs are super expensive and insanely valuable to the people that are buying them is not anything new. Right? So it's the same reason why the Mona Lisa is extremely valuable. And it's not
Yep.
because of the oil on the painting. It's because of the story and the context of the piece. We
And
we
there's
value it. Oh, go ahead, Saucy. Did you want to?
no,
Are
no.
you?
I'm a huge NFT collector. I have a huge collection of NFTs, so I'll definitely get involved in this conversation.
Yeah. Why do you buy them?
Um, honestly, it's artwork. Like I bought Eminem's NFT when it dropped. So he dropped like 3 of them. I spent like $1,000 on his NFT. Um, I'm a huge collector because I see it blowing up, but at the same time, artists like everybody in this chat right now don't have the leverage to drop things like that. Right now, it would just be collecting things from like celebrities, stuff like that. That'll be worth stuff in the future because imagine when Eminem passes away, I've got one of his NFTs. There's only 100 of them, so
One of
it's
his first.
definitely gonna skyrocket, right? So I see it as more of an investment, and I love art. So I've just been picking up all the NFTs. I'm always in Beeple's draws when he has them, everything. Like I think it's the way of the future, to be honest. But I think we still have a solid decade till we get comfortable or even get close to where we should be.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I definitely think that answers that first question. I mean, it is a community. The reason why these apes are selling for like literally one of those apes, one of the Bored Ape NFTs sold for $124 million.
I was seeing there was just like, I get it, but I also don't get it. Like, I'm a user of experiences, so I'm not a collector. So that whole scene is way out of my purview. One, because I don't have that kind of money, and two, I appreciate the value of it, but I'm just not part of it. So when it comes to collecting, I've no interest in it. I want to experience places. I want to build, create, and have people experience my spaces, as many as possible, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't care about the money. I want people to experience cool stuff.
So here's what
So-
I'm waiting for, and I completely agree with that, and I respect that, and I'm totally on the same page. I'm just waiting for someone to make a metaverse like Connor has, where you can sit there and put all your NFTs up on the wall and just show them off like an art museum. And that's like your online art museum. You know what
It's
I
already
mean?
happening. It's already
Yeah.
happening.
See, that's what I can't wait to do is I can't wait to sit there and make a video and just like walk through the area or have somebody hop in with me and they can just like look at all the NFTs I've collected kind of thing. And
Right
yeah,
now, John Velton has his artwork, his NFT artwork in the Leonardo Gallery that's up for another 2 weeks on my website. So
oh, that's huge. I'll have to check that out. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll toss you a link. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
actually
please do.
he posted a link in the Discord somewhere, but yeah, I'll toss you a link.
So Saucy
yeah.
just pointed out probably one of the greatest pillars in human nature. It's also one of the greatest pillars in game design, which is the ability to self-valuate or get a sense of significance. And sometimes this is like accomplishments, and other times it's just being able to show off things that inspire you, right? So it might be like, hey, I've got this thing and it's worth like $1 million. Isn't it really cool? But it might also be, I have the only one of this small band that I really love, that the band inspires me. It's music, it's really niche, it's really cool. But the ability to show that off has like extreme value, which is why it's prominently featured in almost all elements of game design. So I think
And then
that's,
sorry, go ahead. Sorry, my bad. Sorry,
no,
go ahead.
yeah. I just wanted to say that you're hitting the nail on the head. There's four nails that drive all human behavior, and that's a big one for sure.
Yeah, so the other thing with NFTs too is that if you decide to sell it, every time it's sold after that, you get a cut of the sale. Everybody previously that owned it will get a certain portion of the cut, like a tax kind of thing, that will be sent to the original artist will get the most. Then the
I'm
next
a
person
fan
that
of
owns
that.
it.
Like
Yeah,
I'm hoping
so
my space sells on because it's like I'll get 5% of that, and it's like thank you very much.
yeah, so if you own the NFT, so like I bought the peanut butter jelly time one too when it dropped. It was like $3,000, and
How many were there?
I think I don't know. I think there was like 200-300 of them only,
my
but there
God.
was like multiple versions of it. So there was like a
Okay.
Bitcoin one, an Ethereum one, and then the original one. I just got the original one, and it was from the original makers of the first peanut butter jelly time. Like that's a huge meme, and
Wow.
that's a huge thing to have, right? So like those are the kind of things that I buy. I don't just buy from a random artist because I don't see the value in it, because I am about money, but at the same time I want to have pieces of art like Eminem's thing or the peanut butter jelly time that people look at and they know what it is, and they're like, "Wow, how did you get this?" It's like having the rarest Pokemon card when you were
Yep.
growing up. Like it's
Cultural icons.
And then if I decide ever sell it, I will get the money from selling it minus the taxes that go to the original artists. And then if for the rest of my life, every time that thing trades hands and currency is paid for it, I will get a small cut of it every single time for the rest of my life. Like
Yeah, that's awesome.
it's really big.
So two quick questions, just because I don't know. I'm still learning about NFTs. Is that transmissible to your children, or is that only for you?
That's a good question, actually. I've actually never thought of that. I'm gonna have to look into that and get back to you on that one because I can't give you a definitive answer on that.
Yeah, so when it comes to economics, I'm always sort of curious about the transfer of wealth from parents to children, because it creates the desire in people to want to grow on their own rather than, inherited wealth. So to me, that like the idea of NFTs is really interesting, because I don't know if it skirts that, or if it endorses it, and how exactly that would work. But that's really
I
cool.
think I think we're all so young. I think by the time we were to pass away and this stuff hit more mainstream, I think it would be able to you'd be able to write it down in your will. Like it would be considered a part of your portfolio
Asset.
depending on how much money you had invested, and I'm pretty sure you could put that as part of your will when you pass away.
That's
At
awesome.
at that point, right? Because I mean nobody in here is passing away anytime soon, I don't think so.
And the follow-up question, I guess, is
Hope not.
do you get to show, so for example, if you're the first person to own something that was really cool and it takes off in value, and you're like 10 people in, is there any way to sort of show that you were like that owner in a public way?
Yes. Yes. So it's kind of like the blockchain. Everything and every transaction, every time it moves hands, it'll show on a site. If you can put it as anonymous or unknown if you really want to,
Okay.
like if people want to hide their identity. But it does show this person traded it to this person, then this person traded to this person. It'll have a date, how much they paid for it. You can see all of that stuff, just like a blockchain. Like that's why it's really linked into crypto,
Yep.
because it runs on the same kind of platform as blockchain, like the same idea.
And it can also show your ability to get in on the ground floor. Anyway, I thought all that was really
Yeah.
interesting. I
Oh
just
yeah,
wanted to
that's
say
a
this.
badge of honor too. Yeah, if you
Yeah.
were the first person to have it, you could like print that off and frame that and throw it in your house. Like I don't have it anymore, but I was the first one.
Yeah, and to me that just sounds like an interesting game system that I that I like. Anyway,
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that badge of honor concept is actually really the answer to the Mad Empire's question. It's the bragging rights. It's that I owned this massive cultural icon and I did it first.
Yeah.
And that has an incredible amount of cultural value to people. And NFTs are a more efficient way to do that in today's age than the new Nikes or than the Prada bag or than the Louis Vuitton whatever. Like it's more efficient because how many digital people do you interact with? How many people do you interact with on a daily basis in a digital way? Whether that be through social media or through Discord or through any of that stuff, you might versus in real life. If you have the new pair of off-whites and it costs you $4,000 to buy, then when you walk down the street, maybe you'll see a neighbor, the coffee shop barista, and then like the grocery store, and then maybe a business meeting with 2 people in it. And you got 5 people to respect your off-whites. But if I have an NFT in my office and my name is on the ledger and in all my Zoom calls and like it's like I might see 200 people digitally a day. So it's much more important for me to buy the digital version so I can flex digitally than it is for me to flex physically.
It's the way of the
And
future.
and my off-whites get dirty and my off-whites get old and they depreciate in value. And NFTs, as Saucy alluded to, they just appreciate in value unless they're not big cultural icons, unless they're just some coin that no one cares about, then they can depreciate for sure. It's not everything is always going to be up. It should be noted as well that 97% of NFTs are going to fail. Like they're just not going to
If not
appreciate.
99%, yeah.
Yeah,
There's
99
gonna be a
probably.
very small amount, and that's why I won't buy small ones either. It's always something big like celebrity or something at this point. Like I won't. There's some other artists. Like if you go to certain NFT sites, there's some artists that are really killing it that'll probably stick around. But like Connor said, 97. I would say 99 are probably not going to make it 5,
Totally.
10 years down the road.
I think one thing I've picked up in the last I've crash coursed in the last month and a half. I went from I know nothing about anything metaversey to just everything blockchain, crypto. Because yeah, like winning crypto, like you have to learn things real quick. So
Yeah,
that was that. But
it's also a long investment. I would say more long term. Don't try and day trade. Day trading on
yeah, for
crypto is
sure. But one thing I've learned is over the course of like you get a lot of people is like the NFTs, they're worthless, they're not actually worth anything, and it's like it's not so much that see getting into NFTs and cryptocurrency has made me look at that and say that's crazy. It's actually looking back traditionally to everything else and realize that is also crazy. Like ever since the cash was taken off their gold standard, for example, and the increase in marketing as a baseline of communications, for example, nowadays, everything's value is purely perceived, and nothing is real. So when you're looking at like digital technology, it's just it's not even much of an extension to what we're already doing in our society. Like you look at a Prada bag or a Dolce Gabbana bag, and it's not worth that much money. The concept of it is. And now we're just going to that little bit extra further in a world that is taking over more of our everyday existence in that fact that most people are online all the time now. So basically, we're just moving what we're already doing into a digital space and like legitimizing it more, which I think is really good. I've always understood and appreciate the value of giving digital artists and designers the value they're due. So I think it's fantastic that this is coming about, but there are a lot of teething problems. So you see all these people spending millions of dollars on a JPEG, and a lot of people won't get that because they don't understand the concepts behind it. So it's just kind of bad marketing for your average Joe, but this is how capitalism works, basically.
It's how humans work. It's not even capitalism. It's way bigger than that. It's a
Yeah.
fundamental thing.
I would sorry, I'm having a brain fart. I would compare the NFT thing to, I'm not quite sure how old anybody is here, but if anybody was around when the internet first came out, when they first invented it, everybody, even the big investors at the time, thought it was crazy. They thought it wasn't going to work. It's not going to make it anywhere, but we're still sitting here today. So I mean, be careful with who you listen to about it, because all the ideas that people call crazy normally are the ones that actually make it.
Yep.
I
At least the
remember
ones that made it were always seen as crazy.
I remember a friend of mine, he said he wanted to start this thing that that people were getting into, which was designing websites. I was like, oh, who would do that? And turns out the first person he got to do business with in his own company was a major mall in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and he's been carrying that through ever since. So, it's a weird thing. He's just a kid in his basement playing around with whatever was there at the time, and he made a really good living for himself just getting into the ground floor.
Nice. Yep, and that's the opportunity that we have here with the metaverse stuff, because it's brand new. NFTs, absolutely. I have shied away. I actually like. Um, I'm not new to crypto. I minted an album in 2018 before they were called NFTs, right? So it was I've been around it for a long time, and I've been invested a lot of creative projects into it, and I have let the NFT, because I was on the NFT train so early, telling everybody, get on the train, get on the train. And when the train didn't leave the station, I actually got off the train, and then everyone got on the train and left without me, because I didn't have any NFTs, I didn't have any minted stuff, and it all just took off and exploded. And I was like, oh my God, I knew about Super Rare 3 years ago, you guys. But I didn't actually have an account there, right? So It's one of those things where I've let this one go because I'm making sure that I'm on the metaverse train as much as I can be, and even as so far as laying the tracks for it, as much as I can be. So I know that the metaverse and the NFT worlds are going to combine, and they're definitely correlate and overlap with each other. But for me, I'm focusing on the thing that I do, which is teaching people how to build the 3D metaverse spaces as absolutely best I can, and how that integrates and relates to NFTs is definitely just something that's going to develop on my periphery. It's not going to be my main focus. But I wanted to answer your other question about this value question. Like, how is it that we can charge so much value on these big projects, but still want to try to serve so many people with this value? And I think it's the system that I have in place that I've been taught by my business coach about how to approach this problem, is something called value-based pricing. So value-based pricing doesn't price the work, it doesn't price the time. It prices based off of the value the client receives. So if Nike wants a room, and I say, well, how important to you is this room? We basically need to do a few discovery sessions to find out all the problems it's going to solve, right? And how we need to deliver the value and how much value they stand to gain over the next year or so from having this room. Now, that will go, okay, you know what? They're going to sell 1 million more shoes, or they're going to have 1 million more celebrities in their space. They're going to have more traffic. They're going to have more newsletter, whatever it is, whatever measurable goal that is. And then we go, okay, so it makes sense because you want to make $20 million next year. It makes sense for you to invest 1 million of that into this space to make sure that it hits those $20 million goals. Now, the space itself can be anything, right? It has to solve those problems. It has to hit to work towards those goals. Like, it has to be the designer's absolute best effort in order to make that happen. That's why it costs so much. But the exact same room for a community center at a local town, the exact same model, the exact same textures for a community center of a small 2,000 person town that wants to have a public discourse about whether their parks are clean enough. They don't have as much value to gain. And so the price that it would be for that small community would be much smaller for the exact same room. Right? So you can charge Nike, $100,000, $200,000 for a space that solves their problems. Now you got to deliver on that. That's a $100,000 product. Like, you got to deliver. It has to work. You have to be able to serve those needs. But at the same time, it's not actually the space that you're selling. It's the strategy and the thought around the space and the solution to their problem. Now, that same space for a community center might only be $2,000 or $5,000. But you're able to take on the community center's job. You're able to take that project on, even if it's at a loss, because you want to do it, because you want to empower the community, and because you charge Nike enough to be able to pay for those projects. So, and it's upfront and it's honest. You have to. It's a value-based pricing. I am pricing my work based off of the value that you get out of the work. And it's a tricky thing to do.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. That's I can get behind that one.
It's a super tricky thing to do, especially with these new spaces. We don't really know what the value is.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have to have these discovery sessions where we break down the goals into metrics that are measurable and say, look, how much is it worth to you to have 1,000 more people in your newsletter, or 10,000 more shoes sold, or 5 more local community members to have a voice? How much is it? How much is it worth to you to solve that problem? How much pain is it putting you in now? And if I could wave a magic wand and have that pain disappear, how much would you pay for it?
Yeah.
Right? Because pricing is relative. $1 million to Nike is not much. Right? And $1 million to a community center is way out of budget. Right? Yeah. And so we want to fit in the relative pricing model for our clients relative to the size of the problems they're trying to solve.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I like it.
Thanks for the question.
Very well said.
It's a difficult thing to do, and I've been training on it. I've got my business coach. I've got my brand strategist partner who actually just entered the room. What's up, Nick? How you doing? They're all been helping me kind of facilitate this new change and approach to pricing. And I've got to say that it has brought me a lot of opportunities, and it has disconnected me from a lot of opportunities that I didn't need to take.
I found that
Yeah, go ahead.
it's a bit of a weird thing actually. I'm finding that like I've designed my life around stress-free existence. I teach English in Japan like 20 to 30 hours a week, and comfortably live by. So like this whole month
Beautiful.
where I come into the prize money for the thing and like a new job with now that I'm working with Mona, and this whole space, like as he said, it's very difficult to get your head around these concepts of value and charging for it, especially when you get, I think a lot of people will be coming into this space and they do well and they won't know what to do with that information. There's a psychology involved with getting out of your comfort zone, even if it's a more comfortable zone that you will automatically feel uncomfortable about. And I've definitely found that in the last like month or so, where it's just like I'm uncomfortable doing well.
Right.
And in doing so, like taking it back to the point, is finding that sweet spot of being able to charge the value it's worth to the people you're charging and being comfortable with it yourself is actually really hard. And there's a lot of people that will be entering this space trying to either make a buck or they just enjoy the space, which I prefer to do. And they're going to be undercharging because they're uncomfortable charging more, when the truth is they could charge more.
Yes.
Problem.
Yes, Nick, take the wheel on this one, because I relate to that so much, and Nick is actually the guy that helped me a lot with that. Still does.
The upper limit problem, right? We're comfortable in our discomfort. We're comfortable in scraping by. We're comfortable with, oh boy, I hope this paycheck is going to carry me through for the next 3 or 4 weeks. And you get comfortable there. And if you have an opportunity to make more money, well, that's uncomfortable. Or you have an opportunity for a super, super bright future, that's uncomfortable because I'm not used to it. So I'm going to do everything in my power, whether consciously or subconsciously, to burn it to the ground until I'm back to that level of comfort,
Self-sabotage.
Exactly right. And it's and then you add on to that a lot of us have this scarcity mindset of, not valuing our skills and not valuing what we can bring to the table, right? And you put that, you cycle those over and over again, it gets really hard to price something, because I'm not just pricing something, I'm putting a dollar value on me. I'm putting a dollar value on how I value myself, my time, and what I can provide. And so really checking your head and your brain and your past behaviors and thoughts are really important going into starting to negotiate what this value is. And you see it and you feel it all the time. I deal with it all the time too. Connor and I talk about it constantly, of like checking ourselves before sending out a proposal, because we don't want to let that old voice start speaking for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a self-development problem. It's a mindset problem. And yeah, it's, the ULP shows up every couple weeks, upper limit problem. I'm keeping myself down. I don't want to break in, because I'm actually super comfortable grinding it by, hustling, scraping by, instead of actually thriving.
Yeah.
And I'm less comfortable thriving. And yes, it is at some point the hermit crab no longer fits the shell, and you actually have to leave and you got to find a bigger shell.
I think that's an interesting element of like the tutorial. So I'm doing tutorials for Mona, for example. That's kind of my main thing. And yeah, there's a lot of psychology that like I will hopefully put into, because I think every creative has issues. There's just, it's just comes with comes with the land grab, I guess, in regards to
No doubt.
there is psychological issues that you have to work through because you see the world in a very specific way. And I think any tutorial, if at all possible, should include this kind of stuff in regards to 95% this is how you do it, but then 5% this is how you do it well, or this is how you do it comfortably, or this is how you can psychologically improve your way through this state in all sorts of things. So I think there's a lot of benefit to building communities because everyone can help each other out with all of the stuff that all of us are dealing with. It's kind of interesting how we bounce off in that way. And I'm definitely a proponent of bringing it up, like straight up. Like I'm not particularly shy about the things I've gone through and have managed to figure out how to get through, because maybe that'll help someone else. And I think that's very important.
Yep.
I think a lot
Preaching.
of it has to
Go
do
ahead.
with a lot of it has to do with how we dress and how we talk and how we present everything. So we have this this look. I mean, I'll give a couple examples here. You know, when I live in an RV and I people know that at these high end incubators, and they would think that I would work for a really low price for them because I had low expenses. And so I couldn't hide how low my expenses were. And so that we never ended up working together. And also, like for instance, when Disney was looking to buy land in Orlando to build Disney World, it was all a big secret. He had people negotiating for that property that people had no idea why they wanted that property. I had value-based pricing working on me when I was looking into the future boot camp. And he was asking me all these value-based pricing questions like, well, how much do I need to achieve my goal? What is my goal? And it wasn't that much. So I don't know. I did not do the boot camp because I didn't feel it was necessary. So those are my examples. It's kind of like if you're going to do value-based pricing, you have to have a really good facade because people are going to try to figure out what's going on and either work with you or not.
I think it works both ways. So you've got your value for them, and then they've got their perception of value from you. And you need to negotiate that space between the two to get that sweet spot in regards to, listen, I'm not going to rip you off, but I also know that you're worth this much money and this is how much value I'm bringing you. I would appreciate the same sentiment, please. And you'll find like a lot of people don't, because everyone's trying to make like save a buck, cut corners, and especially after the last 2 years. So I think it's interesting where it's just like, okay, how can you navigate this space? And that's a whole skill. That's people skills, marketing. And you're right, how you present is a big part of it.
That's a major.
Yeah, people at this church, Saddleback Church, I thought, oh, these people are going to be very equitable to each other and give each other a fair shake. But once they knew how I live, they totally tried to lowball me. So I ended up not working with them. You know, you're right. Yeah, it happens a lot.
It's an element in game theory, very prominent element. One they teach in business colleges is the art of sitting across from somebody and finding that that equal ground in both scenarios. And I believe a wise man once said that the best business is done when both people feel they've gotten what they've needed, but aren't particularly happy with the outcome. And just this idea that, you know, you both wanted a really cheap deal and you wanted a really good deal for each other, but you can't always, you know, that shouldn't be how business goes. Everybody should get what they need. And then just a little bit extra, and that should be the middle ground. But that's a really tricky field. There are classes and classes and classes taught in business alone on just how to do that, and they play games all the time where they just sit down and they get a card and the card says, this is as low as you can go, this is where you want to be, get as much value as you can. And so both people just sit there and negotiate with each other. It's anyway, It's very, very interesting stuff, and it has a lot to do with what I mentioned earlier about that pillar of significance. You have to be able to give the illusion of value. That's why lawyers wear really expensive suits, right? It's presented in almost every format, and just being aware that you have to be able to present that sense of significance. I'm significant, and thus your value in me is even more significant. Is really important. I just figured I'd throw that out there.
Nice. Yeah. I think you touched on something super important. It's that a deal is made when both parties feel they're getting the better end of the deal. You know, that's when all deals happen. Like I buy the falafel when I go, hey, $4 for a falafel. That's great deal for me. I'll do that. And the falafel seller says, hey, it only cost me 75 cents in supply and 5 minutes of my time, $4 for that. That's a great deal for me. And then money exchanges hands and I get a falafel and he gets money or she gets money or they get money. You know, so it is about both parties getting the better end of the deal, is feeling like they're getting the better end of the deal is when a deal happens. So, and I you know, I try not to, I have this argument all the time about appearance and about clothing and stuff like that, and just like, you know, I do know that it makes a difference. I do know, you know, I wore a button-up shirt today, right? So it's like I do know that there's an element of it there, but I have negotiated the biggest deals like with hair down to my belly button and like, you know, just wearing a torn t-shirt because I'm the best in the space. Sorry, I'm the best in the space. I don't care if it looks like it. I don't care if I live in an RV. I don't care if you don't think my costs are that high and so you can lowball me. This is what the value that I offer to you. I'm super aware of how valuable I am, and whether I'm wearing a button-up shirt or a trash bag is completely irrelevant. And if you can't see past that, I don't need to work with you anyway.
But you're an artist. I mean, you know, if you look
That's
at
right.
if you look at people who are selling art, they are art themselves. And
Exactly.
I think that you fit that loop as well, right? But there, you know, again, it goes to whatever industry that you happen to be working in. Game designers, the best game designers show up with ratty old t-shirts they've worn for 10 years and really like
They
three or
quake on 'em.
400, yeah, $300 or $400 shoes, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys, I have to jet. This has been a super, super awesome conversation. You guys are like more than welcome to hang out here as long as you want. I'm actually 5 late to my next meeting. Saucy,
sorry.
I know you wanted to catch up, but I'm gonna have to do that at 12 if that's okay with you.
Okay, I'll just tell you really quick. I got
Okay.
Employee of the Month yesterday.
Hey, attaboy!
Out of the whole studio. Yeah, that's all I wanted to tell
Fantastic.
you.
There's several
Yeah.
hundred people working there. That's
Yeah, it's like
fucking
over
awesome.
300. Yeah, and I ended up getting the Employee of the Month yesterday, and I'm not even on probation yet.
Congratulations to you. That's beauty.
Friend
I
and
apparently
stranger.
broke the record. I'm the first person to get it that quick.
You're a
Wow.
legend.
I just wanted to let you
Congratulations to
know
you,
and
man.
say thanks for everything, because like I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. And I just
Oh
wanted to let you
man,
know that, man. I really appreciate everything.
thanks so much for saying that. But you know, it was your grind, man. So you it's well earned. Congratulations.
Yeah, but I
All the
could have
praise
ended
goes
up
to
with
you.
another teacher that wouldn't have done the same amount of work and put the amount of effort you put in. So there still is definitely a homage to be paid to you for sure.
Hey man,
Here,
thank you
here.
so much.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
also
guys.
I'll just quickly say too, this has been interesting, but also Connor, let's definitely talk more about maybe prepping me for future art tests because I definitely want to do that a lot more.
Okay. Yeah,
So,
yeah. We can set some time.
cool.
I'll hit you up in the DMs. But I really got to jet, guys. So much
All
love.
right.
And again, thanks to utopiavr.com for sponsoring us. This is awesome. If just check out their website, you know, give them a link, hit up their Instagram and LinkedIn, you know, like check out their space because it's absolutely worth it. And it's going to be one of the companies that I think are going to be worth investing time and money in and space development and just learning more about. So thanks everybody. I got to jet.